NOAA just confirmed that March 2026 was the hottest March in the entire 132-year recorded history of the United States. Not by a small margin. It was the first time any month has exceeded the long-term average by more than 9 degrees Fahrenheit. 10 states broke their all-time March records simultaneously. Phoenix, Arizona hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit 9 days during a single month that is supposed to be spring. Yale Climate Connections classified the March 2026 Southwest heat wave as one of the 6 most astonishing weather events of the century, alongside events that killed tens of thousands of people. And that was March. Summer has not started yet. And the 12-month period through March 2026 was the hottest on record in the entire continental United States. Not the hottest summer. The hottest 12-month period, which means the baseline from which summer temperatures will launch is already the highest starting point in the history of American weather measurement. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center has flagged 36 states for above-normal temperatures this summer. Only Wisconsin and Michigan do not have at least some portion designated for extra heat. 60% of the country is currently in drought. The western snowpack, which supplies drinking water, irrigation, and hydroelectric power for tens of millions of Americans, has melted weeks ahead of schedule. Wildfire acreage in 2026 is already at 231% of the 10-year average before summer has begun. And electricity prices are up 5 to 9% nationally, outpacing inflation for the 4th consecutive year. The summer of 2026 is going to be a convergence of extreme heat, water scarcity, grid fragility, energy costs, food price pressure, and public health emergencies that will hit the American household from every direction simultaneously. And I am going to walk through every one of those convergence points right now, with the data, because the families that understand what is coming and prepare in the next 6 weeks will be in a fundamentally different position than the families that discover it the first time. Their power bill arrives in July. The power grid cannot handle what is coming, and the data centers are consuming the electricity your air conditioner needs. The Daily Upside published an investigation 4 days ago that should be required reading for every American who depends on electricity to stay alive during a heat wave. The investigation documented that the American electrical grid is facing the simultaneous collision of 2 demand forces that it was never designed to handle at the same time. The first is residential cooling demand. When temperatures hit 100 degrees for days or weeks at a time, every household with an air conditioner runs it continuously. Air conditioning accounts for approximately 19% of total U.S. electricity consumption and can spike to 50% or more of peak demand during heat waves. In September 2022, when triple-digit temperatures baked California for days, state officials begged residents to dial down their air conditioning or risk breaking the grid. The state avoided rolling blackouts by approximately 4 minutes of spare capacity. The second demand force is artificial intelligence. Since OpenAI launched ChatGPT in November 2022, tech giants have planted massive data centers across the country to train and run AI models. Those data centers require enormous quantities of electricity running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They do not turn off during a heat wave. They do not reduce consumption when the grid is stressed. They draw power continuously, and their demand is growing exponentially. The Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which operates the grid for most of the state, reported earlier this month that peak demand could reach 367,790 megawatts by 2032, driven primarily by data centers. The current record peak demand in Texas was 85,500 megawatts, set during a heat wave in 2023 that nearly stressed the grid to exhaustion. That means data center growth alone is projected to more than quadruple the peak demand that already almost broke the system. Dr. Mark McNeese at Florida State University told the Daily Upside that the grid cannot support both data center growth and summer peak demand at current capacity, and that the math does not work without massive new build-out. Central Park in New York City already recorded its first 90-degree day this month, weeks ahead of the normal schedule. East Coast residents are turning on air conditioners in April, which is essentially extending the summer cooling season by 6 to 8 weeks on both ends. That extension does not just increase cumulative electricity consumption. It shifts the entire demand curve earlier and higher, compressing the window in which utilities can perform maintenance, repair aging infrastructure, and prepare for the peak months. The grid is entering summer in worse condition than at any point in modern memory, because it has not had the spring maintenance window it normally gets. And the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, the federal entity responsible for assessing grid reliability, has been warning for years that summer peak demand is outpacing generation capacity additions. In their most recent summer reliability assessment, NERC identified the Midwest as particularly at risk because the region has been retiring coal-fired power plants faster than replacement capacity is being built. The Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, MISO, which manages the grid for 15 states from Minnesota to Mississippi, told residents to expect temporary controlled outages during summer heat events. Temporary controlled outages during summer heat events. Temporary controlled outages. Those are 3 words that an American family with an elderly parent, a sleeping infant, or a refrigerator full of insulin should not have to hear from the entity responsible for keeping their lights on, and the phrase controlled outages is the industry euphemism for rolling blackouts. They are calling blackouts controlled outages, the same way the airlines call cancellations schedule adjustments. The language is designed to prevent panic. But the reality behind the language is that when the temperature hits 105 degrees in Dallas and 112 degrees in Phoenix, and every air conditioner in a 2,000-mile corridor is running at maximum, and every data center in the region is drawing power for AI training operations that cannot be paused, the grid operator will have to choose who gets electricity and who does not. And the choice, historically, has been to protect commercial and industrial customers first and residential neighborhoods second. Your air conditioner is less important to the grid than the data center's cooling system. That is not a political statement. That is the economic reality of how grid operators prioritize load shedding during emergencies. The customer that pays the highest rate gets the last disconnection. Your electricity bill is about to become your largest monthly expense, and the Iran war made it worse. Electricity prices in the United States are up 5 to 9% nationally, outpacing inflation for the 4th consecutive year. The Urban Institute's American Affordability Tracker documented that residential electricity costs have increased faster than earnings across much of the country, leaving customers paying approximately $40 more per month in December 2025 than they did in December 2017. That is before the summer spike. During summer peak months, residential electricity bills in the Sun Belt routinely exceed $300 per month and can reach $500 or more for larger homes with older, less efficient air conditioning systems. And the Iran war has introduced a new cost pressure into the electricity equation that most Americans do not understand. Approximately 40% of the U.S. electrical grid is powered by natural gas. When the Strait of Hormuz closed and global energy markets seized, natural gas prices spiked alongside oil because the disruption affected liquefied natural gas shipments as well as crude. American LNG producers have been dramatically increasing their export capacity in recent years, which means produced natural gas that could have supplied domestic power plants is instead being shipped to Europe and Asia at premium prices. The Daily Upside confirmed that when the U.S. exports LNG, it removes that product from domestic markets, resulting in a higher base cost for utilities to sell power to local residents. The increased cost of oil adds to the cost of shipping and distributing LNG, which will probably get passed down to households. So the chain works like this. The Iran war disrupted global energy supply. Global LNG prices spiked. American LNG producers are exporting at the higher global price instead of selling domestically. Domestic natural gas prices rise to meet the export opportunity cost. Utilities that generate 40% of their electricity from natural gas see their fuel costs rise. Those costs are passed to residential customers in the form of higher electricity rates. And the customer who turns on their air conditioner in June will pay a rate that reflects a war in the Persian Gulf, an export market in Asia, a pipeline bottleneck in Texas, and a data center in Virginia, all competing for the same molecule of natural gas. That customer will not see any of those connections on their electricity bill. They will see a number, and the number will be higher than any electricity bill they have ever received. And the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEIP, which is supposed to help low-income families pay utility bills during extreme weather, has been underfunded for years and faces further cuts under the current fiscal environment. The number of Americans disconnected from their electricity for non-payment has been climbing steadily since 2022. The National Energy Assistance Directors Association estimated that approximately 4 million American households had their electricity disconnected in the past year, the highest number in over a decade. And many states do not have moratoriums on summer disconnections the way they do for winter. In winter, most states prohibit utilities from disconnecting heat during extreme cold because it can kill. In summer, fewer protections exist. A utility in Arizona or Texas can legally disconnect a household for non-payment in July when outdoor temperatures are 115 degrees. When the elderly resident of that disconnected household collapses from heat stroke 12 hours later, the death is recorded as a heat-related fatality, not as a consequence of utility disconnection policy. But the chain of causation is clear. The bill was too high, the household could not pay, the utility disconnected, the air conditioning stopped, the temperature inside the home exceeded survivable levels, and the person died. That chain operates silently in tens of thousands of American homes every summer. And the summer of 2026 will have the highest electricity prices, the highest temperatures, the most stressed grid, the most depleted household budgets, and the weakest safety net since LIHEP was created. Every variable in the chain is worse than it has been at any point in modern history. 60% of the country is in drought, and the western snowpack that feeds your water supply has already melted. 60% of the United States is currently in drought conditions. The western snowpack, which is the primary source of water supply for major cities including Los Angeles, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Denver, Salt Lake City, and most of the agricultural Central Valley of California, has melted weeks ahead of schedule because March was the hottest in recorded history. Yale Climate Connections warned that the dry heat and scant precipitation of late March helped to further deplete the already paltry snowpack across most of the U.S. West through both melting and sublimation, which is evaporation directly from snow. This has laid the groundwork for enhanced wildfire and water supply troubles later this spring and summer. The last time a March heat wave of this magnitude preceded a summer, in 2012, the country experienced a devastating drought that destroyed crops across the Midwest, forced North Dakota cattle ranchers to sell their herds because there was no winter feed, and created agricultural losses in the tens of billions of dollars. And the 2012 analog is actually more optimistic than the current setup, because the 2012 heat wave occurred at the tail end of 2 years of La Niña conditions, which is a natural cooling pattern. The current setup features a potential El Niño developing. A Climate Central analysis of 242 major U.S. cities found that 97% have warmer summers now than they did in the 1970s, with an average warming of 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Severe Weather Europe's analysis of subsurface ocean anomalies suggests this developing El Niño could become a super El Niño, on par with the 1997-98 and 2015-16 events that reshaped global weather for over a year. NOAA estimates roughly a 1 in 3 chance of the El Niño reaching strong status by October. If it materializes, 2027 would likely become the hottest year in recorded history. But the summer of 2026 is the transition period when the Pacific warmth begins amplifying heat extremes across the United States, particularly in the southern, western, and central regions. For water systems that depend on snowmelt from the Rockies, the Cascades, and the Sierra Nevada, the early melt means the reservoir refill that was supposed to happen in April and May has already occurred. The water has already been released downstream. And by July and August, the reservoirs will be drawn down to levels that trigger water restrictions, agricultural allocation cuts, and emergency conservation measures. In the Colorado River Basin, which supplies water to 40 million people across 7 states, the situation is approaching the tipping point where Lake Mead and Lake Powell can no longer simultaneously generate hydroelectric power and supply downstream deliveries. When the water level drops below the turbine intakes, the hydroelectric capacity drops to zero and must be replaced by natural gas generation, which increases both electricity costs and carbon emissions in a feedback loop that makes the drought worse. And when hydroelectric generation declines because reservoir levels are too low to spin the turbines, that electricity must be replaced by natural gas generation, which increases demand for natural gas, which increases the price of natural gas, which increases the price of electricity, which increases the cost of cooling your home during the heat wave that caused the drought that reduced the hydro generation in the first place. Every element of the summer crisis connects to every other element in a self-reinforcing loop that tightens with every degree of temperature and every inch of lost reservoir level. The heat causes the drought. The drought reduces hydropower. The loss of hydropower increases natural gas demand. The increased gas demand raises electricity prices. The higher electricity prices cause more disconnections. The disconnections cause heat deaths. The heat intensifies the drought further. And each summer the margins get thinner. The summer of 2026 is arriving with thinner margins than any summer in modern American history. The heat is not a weather event. It is an economic event. It is a healthcare event. It is an infrastructure event. It is a food security event. It is a water security event. And it is a political event. Because the midterm election in November will be the first opportunity Americans have to respond to what happens to them between June and September. Wildfire acreage is at 231% of the 10-year average, and summer has not started. Wildfire acreage burned in the United States in 2026 is already at 231% of the 10-year average. That number was recorded before the calendar reached summer. The combination of early snowmelt, drought across 60% of the country, record March temperatures, and years of accumulated dead vegetation from previous droughts and beetle infestations has created fire conditions that the NOAA's seasonal outlook describes as significantly elevated across the western United States, the southern plains, and parts of the southeast. The wildfires of 2025 in Los Angeles, which generated the most expensive natural disaster in American history, demonstrated what happens when wildfire intersects with an urban area. Insurance companies responded by withdrawing coverage from millions of California homeowners, raising premiums for those who could still obtain policies, and tightening underwriting standards in every state that faces comparable fire risk, which now includes parts of Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Florida, and the Carolinas. The insurance impact of wildfire season is not confined to the states where the fires burn. It reprices risk across the entire homeowner's insurance market because the reinsurance companies that backstop local insurers operate globally and spread the cost of catastrophic events across all policyholders everywhere. When California burns, insurance premiums rise in Ohio. Not because Ohio has wildfire risk, because the same reinsurance pool covers both. And wildfire smoke creates a separate public health crisis that extends thousands of miles from the fire itself. The summer of 2023 saw New York City under an orange haze from Canadian wildfires that reduced visibility to blocks, pushed air quality into the hazardous range, and sent emergency room visits for respiratory distress surging. In 2026, the wildfire conditions are worse than 2023. The drought is more extensive, the fuel load is heavier, and the grid that powers the air purifiers that households need during smoke events is the same grid that is already being stressed by air conditioning demand and data center demand simultaneously. The grid cannot cool your house, clean your air, and train an AI model at the same time during a heat wave in wildfire season. Something has to give. And historically, the thing that gives is the consumer's electricity supply, through rolling blackouts that hit residential neighborhoods first, while commercial and industrial customers are protected. And the wildfire smoke issue deserves specific attention because of what it does to healthcare costs. During the 2023 Canadian wildfire smoke events that blanketed the eastern United States, emergency room visits for respiratory distress surged 30 to 40% in affected cities. Asthma hospitalizations doubled, pharmacy demand for inhalers and allergy medications spiked, and the public health cost of smoke exposure does not end when the smoke clears, because particulate matter from wildfire smoke embeds in lung tissue and exacerbates cardiovascular disease, triggers asthma in children who had no previous diagnosis, and can cause permanent reductions in lung function after prolonged exposure. A summer of wildfire smoke layered on top of record heat, layered on top of Medicaid coverage losses, creates a public health triple threat that the American healthcare system is not staffed, funded, or structured to absorb. The healthcare workers who would treat the surge in heat-related and smoke-related emergencies are themselves burned out from 5 years of pandemic, understaffing, and budget cuts. The emergency departments they work in are already operating above capacity on normal summer days. And the patients who arrive will include a growing number who have no insurance because the Medicaid work requirements will have begun stripping coverage from the people most likely to need emergency care during exactly this kind of event. Food prices are going to spike again because the crops that feed America are being planted into drought soil right now. The agricultural growing season that determines the food you will eat and the prices you will pay this fall and winter is happening right now. Corn is being planted in April and May across the Midwest. Soybeans follow in May and June. Winter wheat that was planted last fall is now entering its critical growth phase. And all of it is being planted into or growing in soil that is drier than normal across the majority of the agricultural heartland. The 2012 drought, which followed a similar March heat pattern, destroyed enough corn production to push food prices up 14% in a single year. The current drought footprint is larger than 2012's was at the same point in the season. And the Iran war has added 2 additional cost pressures to agriculture that did not exist in 2012. First, diesel prices are elevated because of the Hormuz disruption, and every step of the agricultural process from planting to harvesting to transporting to processing runs on diesel. Second, fertilizer prices are elevated because natural gas is the primary feedstock for nitrogen fertilizer production, and natural gas prices are being driven higher by both the global energy crisis and the LNG export competition described earlier. American farmers are planting into dry soil, with expensive diesel, using expensive fertilizer, under a weather forecast that calls for above normal temperatures and drought intensification through the summer. If the rains do not arrive in June and July at sufficient volumes to sustain crop development through the critical pollination and grain fill stages, the United States will face a harvest shortfall that will show up in grocery prices starting in the fall. And the grocery system operates on margins so thin and inventories so minimal, approximately 72 hours of food on shelves at any given time, that even a modest reduction in supply generates a disproportionate increase in price. The avian influenza that has already culled over 185 million birds since 2022 continues to suppress poultry and egg production. The cattle herd is at a 75-year low because ranchers have been liquidating herds they cannot afford to feed. And the tariff situation, if reimposed in July as Treasury Secretary Besant suggested, would add import costs on top of the domestic production stress. The food price environment entering summer 2026 has more upward pressure vectors than at any point since the post-pandemic inflation surge of 2022. And unlike 2022, the consumer entering this price surge is already depleted. Savings buffers have been drawn down. Credit cards are maxed. SNAP benefits are being cut. Food bank demand is at record levels. There is no cushion left. The next food price spike hits bare floor, and the specific crops most at risk tell you exactly which grocery store aisles will be affected. Corn, which is the feedstock for livestock, for ethanol, for high-fructose corn syrup, and for thousands of processed food products, requires consistent moisture during the pollination window in July. If drought conditions persist through July in the Corn Belt states of Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, the pollination failure rate can exceed 30%, which reduces the national corn yield enough to spike feed prices for every animal protein, beef, pork, and poultry, for the following 6 to 12 months. Soybean yields are similarly vulnerable to August drought stress, and soybeans are the base for cooking oil, animal feed, and hundreds of food ingredients listed as soy lecithin, soybean oil, and soy protein on labels that most consumers never read. Winter wheat in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas is currently rated in the worst condition in over a decade because of the drought that has persisted through the planting and growth season. The USDA crop progress reports for April show condition ratings that mirror the 2012 drought year almost exactly. And fruit and vegetable production in California, which supplies approximately 1/3 of the nation's vegetables and 2/3 of its fruits and nuts, is directly threatened by the water supply collapse in the Central Valley. California's agricultural irrigation depends on a combination of surface water from the snowpack-fed reservoir system and groundwater from aquifers that have been overpumped for decades. In drought years, when surface water allocations are cut, farmers pump more groundwater, which accelerates aquifer depletion, which causes land subsidence that permanently reduces the storage capacity of the aquifer. The damage is geological and irreversible. Every drought year permanently reduces California's future agricultural water supply. And the summer of 2026 is arriving with less surface water, less groundwater, and less reservoir capacity than any previous year on record. The food that Americans eat in the fall and winter of 2026 is being determined right now by weather patterns that are uniformly hostile to agriculture and by a water system that is running on its last reserves. The heat will kill people, and the people it kills will be disproportionately older and poorer and more isolated. Extreme heat is the deadliest weather phenomenon in the United States. It kills more Americans per year than hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and lightning combined. And the people it kills are not random. They are disproportionately older adults, people with chronic health conditions, people who lack access to air conditioning, people who live in urban heat islands where concrete and asphalt absorb and radiate heat, and people who are socially isolated without anyone checking on them during multi-day heat events. The 2021 Pacific Northwest heat dome killed an estimated 1,400 people in the United States and Canada. Portland hit 116 degrees. Seattle hit 108 degrees. Lytton, British Columbia reached 121 degrees before being destroyed by wildfire the next day. Most of the deaths occurred indoors, in homes without air conditioning, among elderly residents who lived alone and had no one to notice when they stopped responding. A 2003 heat wave in Europe killed over 70,000 people, primarily elderly individuals in France, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. A 2010 heat wave in Russia killed over 55,000 people, including thousands from wildfire smoke inhalation. These events happened in developed nations with functioning healthcare systems and emergency response infrastructure. They happened because extreme heat overwhelms the body's cooling mechanisms, because elevated nighttime temperatures prevent recovery during sleep, because dehydration and heat stroke progress silently, and because the infrastructure of modern life designed for a climate that no longer exists cannot protect people from temperatures that exceed human physiological limits. The summer of 2026 will arrive in America, where the Medicaid program that covers healthcare for the most vulnerable populations is being restructured by work requirements, where SNAP benefits that feed the elderly are being cut, where the government shutdown has disrupted social services, where community health centers are operating with reduced capacity, where utility disconnection rates are climbing because of unpaid bills from the previous winter's energy costs. The people who are most likely to die in a summer heat wave are the same people who are simultaneously losing access to the programs that keep them alive between heat waves. The Medicaid reduction does not just affect healthcare access during normal conditions. It reduces the number of people who can afford the medications that manage the chronic conditions, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, kidney disease, that make heat exposure lethal. A diabetic who loses Medicaid coverage and cannot afford insulin is a diabetic who will respond to heat stress differently than a diabetic whose condition is managed. The pharmaceutical connection between the healthcare cuts and the heat wave mortality is a connection that nobody is making publicly, and it will become visible in the death toll. And there is one more dimension of the summer crisis that deserves its own conversation because it connects every other dimension into a single economic event. The homeowners insurance market in America is approaching a breaking point that summer 2026 may accelerate past the point of return. Insurers have been withdrawing from high-risk states for 3 consecutive years. State Farm, Allstate, and other major carriers have pulled out of California, Florida, Louisiana, and parts of Texas. The insurers that remain have increased premiums by 30 to 60% in a single renewal cycle. Homeowners insurance premiums are up 55% since the pandemic, according to Brookings. And insurance availability is now a binding constraint on home sales, mortgage lending, and property values in dozens of markets across the country. If you cannot obtain insurance on a home, you cannot obtain a mortgage on that home. If you cannot obtain a mortgage, the home is effectively unsellable to anyone who is not paying cash. If a significant percentage of homes in a region become uninsurable, property values in that region collapse because the buyer pool shrinks to cash buyers only. And property tax revenues, which fund schools, police, fire departments, and local infrastructure, drop with property values, creating a fiscal spiral that degrades the public services that communities depend on. Summer 2026 will produce wildfire losses, hurricane losses, heat-related infrastructure damage, and drought-related agricultural losses that will generate billions of dollars in insurance claims. Each major claim event pushes more insurers to withdraw from more markets, to raise premiums in the markets they remain in, and to tighten underwriting standards that exclude more homeowners from coverage. The summer is not just a weather event, it is an insurance market event. And the insurance market event is a housing market event. And the housing market event is a wealth event for every American who owns a home, which is approximately 66% of the population. When summer breaks the insurance market, it breaks the housing market. When it breaks the housing market, it breaks the household balance sheet. And when it breaks the household balance sheet, it breaks everything else that depends on household wealth, consumer confidence, retirement security, and the economy itself. Summer will break America. Nobody is ready. And the people who started preparing today, who serviced their air conditioner, who checked their insurance policy, who filled their prescriptions, who stocked their pantry, who paid down their highest-rate debt, who called their elderly neighbors and made a plan for checking on them during heat waves, will be the people who come out of September still standing. The rest will be recovering. Some for months, some for years. Some will not recover at all. And by then, everyone will know what I just told you. The only difference is whether you knew it before the heat arrived or after.